Temple Mount Podcast. I am Shogun. Joining me today is my good friend Tios. This is going to be episode 4, I believe, maybe episode 5 of our ongoing series on what we call the Spiral Code. We're going to get into what that is, but make sure you've joined the Temple Mount Discord server and check out our podcast, Temple Mount Official, on YouTube and BitChute. That being said, welcome, Tios. Thank you for joining me. How are you today, sir?
Thank you, Shogun. Doing very well. It's great to be back on the podcast with you.
It's great to have you back. It's been a while, and we're also looking forward to another podcast in the near future on the topic of the Apostles of Jesus Christ. But today we're going to talk about the Spiral Code, and I'll start by giving my best attempt to define it. If you look at the announcements that we made, there's an image that I believe Crimson posted originally, which I think is very relevant to understanding the Spiral Code. So maybe we'll start there as it gives like a visual reference. You can see there's 3 circles which create 3 Venn diagrams showing where they all overlap. You have delusion, insight, and knowledge described by 3 circles, and then the areas between the circles are psychosis, revelation, gnosis, and religion. So I think this is a great image for the Spiral Code. It's a mix between psychosis and delusion with insight and knowledge. Gnosis meaning, unfolding of mysterious knowledge or understanding, revelation, and religion. So basically what I understand the Spiral Code to be is a conscious pattern of synchronicity that interacts with our own consciousness. So we as individuals have our own consciousness, we have our beliefs, we have our feelings, we have our thoughts. But when the Spiral Code is happening, there's an interaction or an interplay between our internal thoughts and feelings and external events. And the external events can involve what other people around you say or do, what you see on graffiti or posters or artwork around you, what the radio, television, music is playing to you. Even nature, animals, what happens in nature. And the point is all of the things that you're experiencing externally are intertwined with and meaningfully connected to your internal experiences so that you feel like you're seeing a series of patterns or a series of symbols or a series of metaphors or a series of signs, like you're being communicated to by the people around you, by the radio, by the internet, and by nature. And this seems to have a supernatural quality. And it also seems to have a human quality. It might have to do with artificial intelligence. It might have to do with intelligence agencies. It might have to do with God and the devil. It might have to do with psychic powers and magic. But it all comes together as what we call the Spiral Code. And it does definitely have to do with mental illness and diagnosable mental conditions. But again, there's a difference between just being in a psychosis and what we call cyanosis or Spiral Code. And the difference is defined by those parameters like insight and knowledge and revelation. So when you're getting the insight, the knowledge, and the revelation, then that's when the Spiral Code is in effect, not just pure psychosis. So that was a little bit long-winded, might not have made much sense. But how do you think about the Spiral Code, and how would you define it, Tios, if you were trying to describe it to someone who wasn't familiar with the use of that word?
Well, I think you did a great job. I was thinking about you taking the words out of my mouth in a few different areas as you were talking about it. One area I might expand a little bit on in just the definition is that I think for a lot of us, Spiral Code also includes the shared common experience of the ordeal. That's seems to be a major focal point for all of us. If it was just happening to singular individual and it was just his personal experience trying to describe something, it wouldn't be as interesting as the fact that, 70 to 80% of our server has experienced it from greater to lesser degrees. And I think that alone, starts to get the subject a little bit more attention and a little bit more seriousness within our group, because we talk about all sorts of different conspiracies and mental illnesses and how they might affect a person in their reality. But this one seems to be the one that everyone shared is not really willing to cast off or write off as a total mental illness or total psychotic episode. And that's not just from within our community, but the research I've done across YouTube and Reddit and different online sources where these communities of people gather seems to be a common shred, is they're not willing to let go. That this spiral of coincidences that leads you down this rabbit hole of Alice in Wonderland madness seems to have something more to it than just a mental illness.
That's right. So we know that mental illness exists, mental disorders, or what you might call neurodivergence. People's brains work in different ways. So like I, for example, have bipolar disorder. And so I've learned to like understand what that is. You know, you have mania when your mood is elevated and you feel invincible and you're chasing euphoria and you're chasing your inflated sense of confidence. And you can get psychosis from that. And that includes things like delusions, believing things that aren't true, like believing you're Jesus or believing you're the Antichrist or believing you're God or believing you're the devil. You know, these are the delusions that come with this. And that is real and that happens. But at the same time, just because you have a mental disorder doesn't mean that everything you're experiencing is only in your head. They say just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Well, in the same way, you could say just because you're mentally ill doesn't mean you're not having a real spiral code experience. So there are external events that I've experienced where people outside of me said things or did things, or events transpired in a way that I know was not just in my head. It was actually happening externally to me, and yet it doesn't fit within a mundane or consensus pattern of reality. It only fits within, like you said, an Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass experience. And so we use certain terms that help understand this, like through the looking glass, Alice in Wonderland, Dreamland, Twilight Zone, Wonderland. These are kind of terms for when all of a sudden the rules of reality that normally are in effect are suddenly not in effect anymore. And all of a sudden you're having an adventure that is very real because, you know, you're thinking about this particular concept and then that song comes on and it's literally the lyrics that you were just thinking of. And then a person outside looks at you and like is wearing a shirt that has an image on it that you literally just drew in your journal this morning because you had a dream about it last night and you woke up and you wrote it down and then you saw the woman with the shirt and it's the same thing from your dream. And then all of a sudden you get a phone call from the person you haven't seen in 10 years, but you just, before you got the phone call, you thought about him and then suddenly calling you. And then he has something weird to say to you that like relates to a Bible verse you read that day, or he quotes that Bible verse. Like this is, I'm just making this up as an example, but this is sort of what it's like. It's like there's a chain of synchronicities, a chain of coincidences that just gets way too long and way too real for you to tell yourself, oh, this is just in my head. And then at a certain point, we have to look for alternate ways to talk about it and alternate ways to think about it than just, oh, well, you're sick, you know, take your meds. And so, like you say, in this community, practically everybody has had their run-ins with the spiral code. And that is, as you say, very interesting. So I guess my next question is, I've kind of broken it down that, you know, part of this is internal to us. Part of it is humans doing this on purpose to us and being part of like gang stalking or a targeted individual, or as you say, handling. So let's talk about that aspect. Like, do you feel that there are human agencies and organizations who are consciously interacting with people who are in a spiral code state as part of like an overall spiral code like program?
That's a difficult question to answer. I wouldn't dismiss the idea entirely, but I'm not sure that I could explain why I feel like it's happening. You know, when I first started to, and I will skip the beginnings of the details of I think the mania that kind of began because of the synchronicities, the coincidences that kept happening. And I'll just say that once I was right into what we're calling a spiral code, and I could realize that I was there. The feeling that I had was that I was just actually, for the first time in my life, actually looking at what I was seeing around me. That I had lived 33 years in a kind of daze of just going about whatever I was doing. And yes, I could see the world around me and I would appreciate beauty and I would look at flowers but I would never attempt to connect dots. I would never look more into a situation than was just its face value. And so for the first time in my life, I'm actually observing, and I felt stupid. To be honest with you, I felt like what an like completely self-obsessed idiot I was to not notice that we are totally observed in this prison cell. Like we're in a prison cell right now, and that there was obviously people who were in on it, who might fall into the category of gang stalking, agents, handlers. But in my mind, most of them fall into people like you and I who have become aware of it and then just deal with it, live in that world. Like we're all aware of it now, like you and I. And we go into a restaurant, we don't talk about it. We try to wake everyone up. We get our hamburger and we walk out, right? And even though we know that it is a cell that we've walked in and out of, we know that it's a total movie set all around you, right? And that's what it feels like. It feels like there are people in on it and people who aren't in on it. And the way that you get to stay in the set is by not being erratic and not being scary to other people and breaking the system, because the second that you wind up in an institution on a mental health watch, it's just like that. Just snap your fingers and watch how fast police come and take you to a hospital, right? Watch how fast, if you don't change, you can become a ward of that state you're in, right? And these things, I think for me, that it's hard for me just to speak directly to your question is how many of those people are actually involved in the system or are just born into it. Is there anyone in the system that is responsible for it? I'm not sure.
Right. And we know that like once one person is spiral code, they start interacting with other people who are in the spiral code in a way that doesn't require to be like stage managed. It's self-perpetuating, in other words, because like the spiral code interacts with itself. So if I'm in a spiral code and I see someone else out on the street who's also in a spiral code, our spiral codes are going to become entangled with each other, and they're going to start seeing you and what you're doing that might be unusual as having to do with their spiral code. So you, like, we think about the other people we encounter and we go, oh man, this guy was gang stalking me today, or like, oh man, this guy was like acting in a strange way and I meant this. But we are that to other people, right? Imagine like when you're going around acting in a different way because you're in a spiral code and you're acting in a strange way, and then someone else sees you and you don't know that they've been on their spiral code trip, and now they're tripping out about you and they're going home and saying, oh man, this Tios guy, man, he was fucking with me because like he was doing the same shit that I was thinking about. You know what I mean? So it's like it's self-perpetuating and it recruits its own agents. Like it recruits its own agents into the system. And then you start having special languages and special codes and code names and code walking and code talking. And everybody's like interacting with each other. And you never know who is initiated and who isn't. And to what degree are they initiated? Or even to what degree are we initiated? Like, where do we sit on this totem pole? You know, it's like, you never know. You know, and like you said, you can't directly acknowledge it because then you're breaking the fourth wall. And once you break the fourth wall, you get hospitalized, or, you know, the police come and try and throw you in jail or in a psych ward.
Right. And, you know, it's interesting that you were saying, you know, the people who I thought were most likely to be involved, right, were the ones who were the least willing to talk to me about what was going on. But it wasn't a lack of like desire to talk. They were scared. Like I could see that they were visibly bothered by the mention of it, and that their responses were always like, it's best not to poke into areas like that, right? And then I would be like, oh, you know, this person who doesn't want to talk about it at all seems to have some knowledge. And I took that as advice from them, like, right, like the wisest, oldest people that I went to and was asking them questions about what was going on around us. They immediately became pale in the face and were just like, change subject now. You know, I don't want to meet death today. Thank you very much, Sonny boy. You know what I mean? Like it was like, okay, now I'm on to something here, right?
Right. What I've learned to do is just become hyper aware. So when someone starts interacting with me in the spiral code is like I turn all my observational faculties up to the maximum. I try and read the person's body language. I try to read the clothing they're wearing. I try to read every word they're saying. But people in the spiral code, they always talk in code speak. They always talk in Twilight speak. So it's like there's like 100 different ways to interpret what they're saying. And no matter which way you interpret it, it's very strange. And it's not something someone would normally be saying to you. But it's also never like totally clear and specific. Like, you know, for example, a guy came up to me and he goes, "Oh, you know, you're not what they say you are." And I'm like, "Well, what do they say you are?" And he's like, "They say that you're someone who just takes what he wants, but I see you're just doing your training. You're just doing your training. Did you do your training today?" And like stuff like that. And it's like they don't tell you who, like, you know, I'm not what who says I am. What do they say I am? Like, and it won't really make sense, but it'll just be enough for you to know that something weird is going on. Like, why is this person approaching me? Why are they saying this thing to me? Why does it not quite make sense? Who's talking about me? What are they saying about me? Why? And it's like, and people will let you know that they know stuff about you. Like one of the typical things is like you'll be in public and someone's talking about you in specific detail. That means they must know about you and have been briefed about you. You know what I mean? And yet, in theory, they should have no idea who you are or know you at all.
That was, yeah, it's hard to go into the specific details, but things like that were definitely the hardest. The hardest to deal with was the interactions from other people and the way in which they would be totally unnatural interactions. Like I may be out of my mind in this moment, but I'm cognitively listening to what this person's saying, and they must be out of their mind too, because whatever they're saying to me is not something that you should ever be just for any reason saying. So an example would be during the deepest part of my spiral, many of us felt the same way at this time of the year. We were all going through something in a shared experience that we were in this test, this contest of sorts that was felt like life or death. And there was all kinds of little tests, like everything you did in the day might be turned into a test. And it was very overwhelming and hard to deal with this contact, this spiritual intuition and understanding that you were being tested and you don't know why. And so I receive like this testing that I have to go get dinner, but that I have to choose the right place or that I'm going to die, like Squid Games, right? Like pick the right restaurant or you die. Huh? And it was like, that's where I was at in my spiral code. And so I'm driving down the street to go to the restaurant I want to, and my neighbor, my elderly neighbor, who's been there for 75 years on the block where I live, right? He stops me in the street, and he asks me what I'm doing. I said, I'm going to go get some dinner. And he goes, yeah, well, I had Jack in the Box last night. You know, if I was you, I'd have Jack in the Box. And he wrinkles his brow, and he stares at me and nods. And I'm like, what? And he pats the car and he goes, Jack in the Box, boy. Jack in the Box. And so here I am. I didn't want Jack in the Box, but I'm feeling like he's trying to save my life and give me the hint to this. Because that's where I was at. I was on the game going to make sure I didn't die and going to McDonald's. And he tells me, no, you need to go to Jack in the Box. I'm like, oh, okay. And so I went to Jack in the Box. But there was no reason for him to be so insistent about where I had dinner. You know what I mean? It's absolutely asinine.
Yeah, I understand. And it's like, once you're in a spiral code, you're emitting a magnetic resonance that attracts anyone else who's in the spiral code and any and all spiral code related phenomenon. And so it's like people who are already on these weird tangents meet up with each other, and then they start feeding into each other's, you know, delusions / perceptions. So I've experienced this where you're like running around outside and like you're encountering all these people who are in the same mindset as you are. Like you're in this totally far out state of mind, but you're running into people who are in the same state of mind, and like you make sense to each other and like even have the same symbols. It's like I do this, like I call it spook shit. And like multiple people I met literally had tattoos of the same spook. Like it's like a ghost, like picture of a ghost with like the pointy like ghost head and the like little ghost arms. Like I met a girl who had that tattoo. My other friend had that tattoo. One guy put it on as like a temporary tattoo, but he still had it on his neck. So people who were part of this team would mark themselves with this spook tattoo. You know, another guy had a tattoo that said CIA. Like, people's tattoos mean stuff. And like, yeah, I met people that knew me and knew what was going on with me. Like, this one guy was sitting there with his laptop and just like reading out details about my academic record and my CV and like my education and all this stuff. But at the same point, it has to be something bigger than people. Like, it's like a bigger force has to be at work. I sometimes wonder about AI, because you get the thing where the music that you're listening to, or what's happening on your YouTube, or like whatever's coming through the internet seems to be synchronizing, and like you can actually hear the radio talking to you and stuff. So that makes me, or like that made me think about like AI. Sometimes you consider like extraterrestrials, and then most of the time I consider it in terms of this like great drama about spirits and angels and demons, and like that there's a spiritual contest going on. Like you talked about like feeling like a contest was going on. Like I feel in terms of like it's a spiritual contest, like and we're being observed and monitored by the government, as well as like other forces, as we're going through these tests and these experiments. And like, you know, I believe they use, you know, psych wards and other places like that to do social research on people. And that's part of what's going on as well. But, you know, do you also encounter, you said you felt the companionship, like that was one thing that you missed about the Spiral Code, is the feeling of companionship, because you always feel like there's like something else there with you. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like,
Yeah, it was. So, you know, I'd spent so much time alone in my life that it's probably hard for a lot of people to relate to it. But when this entity or entities came into my conscious stream and into my life, it was drastically noticeable, because I am so alone, such a hermit. My environment is so maintained to my familiarity that once I had this thing happen to me, it was night and day. It was blatantly obvious that there was outside influence, and it drove me madder and madder and madder and madder. And this presence, this company, was at first immensely evasive, and they were immensely hostile, because I was threatening to them. I was like stomping around the house, like, if I can find you, I'm going to kill you. I'm ripping all the light bulbs out. I'm thinking it's AI. I'm thinking that it's technology. I'm thinking they're using waves. I'm putting a pot on my head, seeing if it's, you know, I'm doing everything I can, trying to stop it and fight it. And so it's becoming hostile and aggressive to me too. Then eventually I just submitted to like laying and like really prostrating myself before it, like weeping and weeping and weeping about like why it wouldn't just leave me alone for days. And, you know, I'm rubbing my body in ash and just crying like, what is happening to me? And eventually they became like sympathetic and loving. And then in that time, and that was through all of my, to explain what's happening, all of my TV, my radio, my phone is all talking to me directly, breaking the fourth wall at all times. Like, and when I mean they're being aggressive, like literally the guy on my phone who's in the podcast I'm watching is telling me he wants to kill me. Right. And I mean, it was just terrible. And so once they actually started to become amenable, then it was like having a friend there with you all the time. Whenever you turn on the TV, you could laugh at them, make a joke, and they would laugh. You know, you could legitimately have like full blown conversations with anyone that you wanted to, because you'd put it on your phone and there that person would be talking to you. And it was a great sense of enjoyment. And they even told me, they said, boy, you're going to miss this when it's gone. And I told them, like trying to be arrogant, I was like, no, you're going to miss talking to me when it's gone. And it's been gone for, you know, a year and a half now. And I got to tell you, I don't miss it. I miss the company, but I do not miss going to watch a podcast and having them threatening to kill me for an hour. You know what I mean? That wasn't fun.
My experience was a little different. Like I basically listening to this particular podcast, which was just music. It was like DJ sets. And like EDM and like, electronic music. And I'd be listening to this one podcast. That was all I'd listened to. And again, the podcast wasn't a podcast. It was just music. And each set was like a long set, like hours long. And so for like the whole period of time that I was away, I'd just be listening to this music. And like, I had such a wonderful, like one-to-one communication with this music. Like the music was a companion, like the music was a personality, and like the things that it was singing about and the lyrics would always be like one-to-one perfectly matched with what I was doing. So I literally was communicating. I thought that either I was telepathically making this music play or that the music was telepathically talking to me. It was either like my mind was like translating directly into this music and that was just like being broadcast out of my head through my phone, or that like some kind of spirit was communicating to me through it. But it was totally great. It was like just like my best friend. I was just like hanging out with this like musical angel at all times that's just like, communicating to me directly through this music. And so it was great. I never had the like persecutory aspect in the online thing, but I did have the communication with music and feeling like it was talking to me. So I find that with spiral code, like it can go in the right direction or it could go the wrong direction, in the sense that you can trace the spiral code inwards out or outwards in, and you could make a spiral going upwards or you could make a spiral going downwards. So sometimes, like I call like a psychosis that isn't managed properly is very damaging, and that's what we call psychosis. But when a psychosis is managed well and properly, then it becomes cynosis, and we actually incorporate the psychosis and get some insight and some knowledge out of the experience. So have you had any luck, like being out, like, have you never had a recurrence of this experience? Like, has it only happened to you the one time, or is it something that you've experienced multiple times? And if so, do you find it gets easier to manage as time goes on?
Yeah, I think that nothing about the world I'm living in has changed. And the only thing that has changed is my tolerance for the experience, and also my ability to absolutely ignore the experience. You know what I'm saying? That I do not allow it to have any space. And so even though it's happening, I don't grasp it. But there was definitely good and bad parts of the experience. I think the best part of the experience was that for the first time in my life, I actually did look at the people around me way deeper. And once I had gone so mad that I lost everyone I knew as being fake actors, and I came out of that illusion or that delusion, that spiral, I was able to actually get to know them and love them again, even fall in love with them as family and friends again, even and try to get over the damage that waking up to something that it seems like is being hidden from you, and that there's people that know and that they're hiding it from you, that it hurts. And that waking up to that feeling, and being in a world where you feel like you've been the joke, where you're the laughing stock, and that there's this group of people who are in control, and like you're like a slave. It's a devastating feeling. And so coming out of that and realizing that most people are just going about their work, and the guy in front of you with his, boots wore through the soles is just trying to make it home at the end of the day. And so those were good aspects that came out of it. And I try to not embrace it at all anymore, and I just run from it. I smile when it gets me and I can't hide from it. I just smile and say, "Oh, you got me." There it is. There's that undeniable miracle of synchronicity that has absolutely no place in the situation right now, but I'm just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, it almost becomes like, like the script of my life stopped making sense long ago, like so many years ago. Like if I was writing it down as a book, like the point at which the reader would be like, well, this isn't realistic anymore. Like I don't believe this anymore. This is unrealistic. Like that point has been passed years ago. You know what I mean? So my own life doesn't make sense to me. Like I know that something else is going on. I don't know what it is. And I may not ever be able to fully explain it, but you just take it in stride. You have no choice. You just have to take it in stride. Like what do you do when you realize that the government, the police, the fucking like all different agencies have some kind of, you know, file on you, and the CIA and everybody, and meanwhile you're, you know, there's spiritual phenomenon going on as well. You know, we're just out of our element in this. Like, we're on a chessboard, but we can't see the details. It's the fog of war, and we don't even know what piece we're on, what piece we are on the chess game. You know what I mean? We just know there's other pieces that are bigger than us, and like, we don't necessarily even know whether we're playing the white team or the black team. You know what I mean?
I admire the humility there, because that's exactly how I feel about it. I at times, they told me so many different explanations for what was going on. I think trying to get me to stop seeking the truth, that it was like wall of lie after lie after lie after lie, until like, which one will he finally believe so that he'll stop looking, right? And I think the one that finally satisfied me was that we're all children that love to be surprised, and we're so hard to surprise, and God loves to surprise us, and that we will ruin the surprise if we can, no matter what we do. And like, we will open that present when no one's looking and then tape it back shut. We will ruin our own gift, and that I should just be patient, and that there is something else going on here, and that this is an amazingly awesome story and life and existence, and just stop trying to ruin the surprise by getting to the end before it's ready, right? And that finally, I said, okay. So I said, fine, fair enough. I was that little kid who ripped open all the presents, and I am just going to be patient and see where this goes. I'm not going to scream and stomp my feet for duffel bags of money anymore. Fine, I'll calm down, you know.
Bitch better have my money. Wait, no. Bitch better have my money when I roll in.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's weird that you said that thing about the Christmas presents and ruining it early, because that was part of my recent, like, one of my recent spiral codes was literally the whole exact same thing about like Christmas presents and opening them early, and how God didn't want us to open the Christmas presents early. So that's strangely specific. But man, that's very interesting. We could go on, but maybe this would be a good time to see if anyone has questions, you think?
Sure.
Does anyone have a question or a comment who's been listening?
Yeah, I could. Hang on, I'm going out into the patio. So could I just give like a quick summary of sort of my experience with the spiral code and see what you guys sort of think about it? Is that okay?
For sure.
Okay, so I've been in hospital 3 times, and the third time was the one I'll talk about, because there was this sort of weird theme of like, it's like, I guess the theme would be like delusion of grandeur, but like projected onto you, right? So like there was this one woman there who was very strange, who said to me like, she was talking about karma and how everyone has like these responsibilities and duties that they have to uphold in this life in order to work off their karma, right? And I asked her like, well, what's my responsibility? What do I have to do? And she said, oh, you're fine. You came out knowing who you were. You don't have any karma, right? There was this other guy who, when I met him, he said something like, words have power. If you've ever said the F word to your mother, that's bad energy right there, right? Words have power, and I'm like Neo, right? He said he was like Neo, right? And then he said, but in some ways I see like an Anakin Skywalker in you, and maybe I can teach you so you don't become a Darth Vader, right? And then there was this other guy who, he was younger than me, and he was having sort of trouble. He was like it seemed like it was a little bit, the whole experience was a little bit traumatic for him. And I was like telling him like, oh no, it's all right. And I was just like sort of spouting off about the random crazy shit I was thinking, right? And at one point he said to me like, about the nurses and about the hospital staff, he said like, you have they listen to you, like you have the power to manipulate them or control them or something, right? And then the final one was there was this guy who he said, "Have you ever heard the song 'Do You Know Who You Are?'" And I said no, and he said, "Look it up, and then we'll talk about it next time." Because the woman and this guy they were on a separate floor than me, so I only saw them occasionally when I went out for smokes, right? And so I looked up this song, and it was a band called Atreyu, right? And so the main character of, or the sort of deuteragonist in the Neverending Story, the little native boy in the Neverending Story itself, right? His name was Atreyu, and so I go back to him, and he was like, "Did you listen to it?" And I was like, "Yeah," and he said, "What did it make you think of?" Right? And I said, "It made me think of Atreyu from the Neverending Story." And he said, "Ah, so you remember who you are?" And I said, "Like I'm Atreyu," and he was like, "Yep." Right? So it was just this weird theme of like grandeur being projected onto me by other people, right? So what do you guys think of that?
I think it's another example, and like a Crimson, or like all of us have said, like we said, this is something that's affected Tios, right? It was everybody in the community, like the majority of us have had, and I believe the spiral code brings people to the server, like all the way back through Roundtable. We always have attracted a certain kind of people who are very unique. Like, in your own life, you're probably the only person who's had these kind of experiences, but here we all have. So I believe that the spiral code led to the creation of the server. I believe everyone who's here was brought here by the spiral code. I believe that part of the spiral code is this tendency to weave people together and draw them together in order that the synchronicities can become more dense and the synchronicities can become more concentrated. Because once you have a group of people in the spiral code and continuous communication on a server like this, then the spiral code is multiplying exponentially, because your symbols and my symbols become intertwined, where I think of symbols associated with you and you think of symbols associated with me. And then the people in the server become symbols, and like you start dreaming about them and like their avatars and stuff like that. So I don't have any specific insight other than, if you identify it as a spiral code yourself, then that's what it is.
Right. If I could say one more thing real quickly, I found it very interesting where you guys started at, where Tios started at the beginning with the whole like, we're in a prison, right? There's guards and sort of facilitators who know, right? And some people who know are really afraid to talk about it. The juxtaposition between that and the answer he was given as to what is going on, right? The whole Christmas present thing, because I didn't experience that exactly. There was something about Christmas. There was something like there about Christmas and how it was really like peaceful thing, whatever it was. But I just find it interesting that it in my experience there has been this sort of flipping between this is a really beautiful thing. There's nothing scary really going on, and it's been flipping between the back and forth between that and like, no, this is spiritual warfare. This is like the most serious shit there could be,
Yeah. And the way that we look at it is up to us. We can take it as seriously or as lighthearted as we want. Sometimes it's good just to laugh about the spiral code. Sometimes that's the best way to take it, is just laugh. I mean, it's a trip. It'll take you for a ride, I don't know. Does anyone else have a question or a comment that's been listening? Well, Tios, is there anything else about the spiral code you feel you could elucidate on that help people understand? I imagine this is still difficult to understand what we're talking about for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would just say maybe if everything in your life isn't going like best, and this is really causing you a lot of problems, then I think the best advice I can give you is to totally dismiss it for now until you get everything else stabilized. Try to block it out. Try not to pay attention to it. Try not to ask questions. Try not to find yourself Googling at 3 o'clock in the morning through, the 17th Wikipedia link that you're clicking on through the articles. Just just try to stop and let things recover and try to heal for a while, and then give your research a go again. But it's good to take a break and let things stabilize because they can be super destructive. So
yeah, it can be hugely destructive, and it's an addiction. They talk about intelligence addiction. People are addicted to intelligence. And in the same way, following the spiral code is hugely addictive because each new confirmation, each new symbol, each new coincidence, synchronicity, like reaffirms it in your mind. Like, yes, it is happening. This really is happening because this, because this, because this. And then you just start like realizing, like, you forget that there has to be a reason why you're chasing this. You're just like, I just want to see what the next thing is. Like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And when you're doing that, the craziest shit will happen. It's mind blowing. It's an adventure and it's incredible, but it tends to leave a lot of fucking distortion in your life because it's just overwhelming. So I think this has been another good attempt to elaborate on something very difficult to explain. And I appreciate you sharing your experience. Is there anything else you wanted to add or talk about?
no, brother, no. Thank you for having me on here. It's always great doing one of these with you, and hopefully we can come back and go into more detail about the different experiences. Maybe we can think about it, and if there's anything we want to add later, we'll do another episode.
Yeah, I think that's right. We're inclined to do shorter episodes in the future because that seems to be where people's attention spans are at. So we'll wrap this one up now. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks Hermes for recording. Make sure you join the Temple Mount Discord server, and please check out our videos on YouTube and BitChute, Temple Mount Official, Temple Mount Podcast. Lots of great episodes. And we'll have a few more coming up, especially with Tios on the Apostles, and maybe another Spiral Code episode coming down the pipe. That being said, thanks everybody. Let's jump to Templar Tavern for the remainder of the night.